Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington, and welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. We're glad that you've tuned in. A few things we wanted to tell you at the beginning of the show, and that's this podcast was created to be a tool to help you, primarily to discover and grow your EQ. Science and our own lived experiences confirm that the better we are at managing our emotions, the better we're going to be at making decisions, which leads to a better life. And that's something we all want. We're glad that you've taken out the time today to listen and hope that something that you hear will lead to a breakthrough. Hey, one last thing. We'd really appreciate a review on whichever platform you use to listen. And if you want to, leave some comments about what you heard today, as well as follow and subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode as we continue this journey. And with that, the show begins. Moe Carrick.
Hello,
good to see you.
Eric. Good to see you as well. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. And I've really been looking forward to this. And I know some of our audience would say, Eric, you always say that, but it's true. And I don't know if you know this, Mo, and it doesn't make us super special, but when we bring a guest on, we bring them on because we've had some kind of connection with them and we knew a bit about their story and about what they're about. So yes, I am very excited that you're here with us today. So let me begin with this idea of humanity in the workplace. And I know the work you do and the work you have done doesn't only revolve around that idea, but I think that's a core sort of not maybe it's a principle, maybe it's a core focus, right? So when we say humanity in the workplace, everyone might shrug their shoulders and go, well, of course, we're human beings, Eric. I mean, come on. But I mean humanity in that how we relate, how we feel, what impacts us in this thing we call the workplace or career. For the audience, could you maybe talk about what that means for you? Maybe as it relates to your work and to how you view those things?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for asking the question in such a sort of provocative way, because you're right. Saying humanity at work can definitely feel like one of those sort of terms we use all the time, like team and
Yes.
leader, that we all assume we know what it means, but we don't. So for me, I think where I center, and it's never been more true really than right now in January of 2025 for me around what's happening at kind of a meta level. It's about building workplaces that are fit for human life.
Mm.
For me, that's about humanity at work. We haven't really historically built our workplaces specifically to activate the talents of the human beings that work there historically, because much of how we've designed our organizations is based on outdated mindsets that we inherited from the Industrial Revolution. So those mindsets still live in our epigenetics and in our DNA and in our organizational structures and beliefs in a way that's actually more focused on not building workplaces that are fit for human life, but building workplaces that accomplish profit goals, irregardless of what happens to human life within them. And
Mm.
I'm all for profit. My company's for profit. I'm not anti-profit or anti-capitalist, but I don't believe profit can be the only North Star, because profit, when relentlessly pursued without any mindfulness of people and
Mhm.
planet, for
Yeah.
example, creates a doomed future for the profit and sustainability of that organization. So for me, that's, that's a lot, but that's kind of the gist of where I see it. It's like, can we build our workplaces to actually be fit for human life? And what I mean by that is that they in a positive way, exploit and bring out the absolute best that each person who works there has in them to come to work.
You know what's interesting, Mo, as you talk about the human life, and obviously we're in the emotions business at Spirit of EQ. I had a friend who was going through a family crisis. I mean, it was pretty serious, and their boss communicated some empathy about, I'm sorry that that happened. Is there anything we can do? And it was brief, but he followed it with, Now you are going to be able to attend that uh, corporate strategy session next Tuesday, right? You're not going to miss that. And when they told me that, I'm going, was that empathy, faux empathy? And the reason I want to be careful because I can't read his mind. I wasn't there. I don't know the motivation. Maybe he was being truly, but it was that follow up.
Wow,
It was
right.
almost like the follow up negated the first part. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Um,
totally.
yeah,
Totally.
because I sometimes think from my experiences and those I've interacted with client wise, the majority they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to know that you know what, in a time when I can't be everything that I would like to be, you're okay with me being in that place. You're not going to try to usher me or push me out of that place in order to further what you have designed me to do. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. It reminds me of, back in the day, we used to teach feedback with like, do you remember these days, Eric, like the sandwich model? Like, oh, Eric,
Right.
feedback for you. I really like your shirt. By the way, you're terrible at blah, blah, blah. It's sort of like a bait and switch, which thankfully we don't teach feedback that way anymore, right?
Right.
The poo sandwich, we used to call it. Um,
Yep.
but I think empathy, the thing about empathy, right, that's so powerful is that it only works if it's real. And so what I'm noticing in that example you gave, it's like, yeah, it maybe did feel real at first, like, oh, thank you. Thank you for seeing the situation I'm in. But then that little hook at the end of like, and by the way, I had this expectation, the way that you said it and the way that maybe that person said it really felt like, oh, wait a second, then you don't actually see me or get me. Now, what's interesting to me about that one, and this is where like I love this work in the realm of emotional and social intelligence because it's so nuanced. Because when I think
Yes. Right.
about right, the emotional intelligence skill of reality testing, it's possible that in fact I, as the business owner or the leader, I actually really am hoping that you are still going to be there Tuesday because you're the best at it and the business will do better if you're there.
Yeah.
So, how is it I might say that in a way that doesn't undo the really good positive impact of feeling with someone in a crisis that conveys
Yeah.
both, gosh, it would be awesome if you're able to do that. And also if you can't, I'd like to tap into your wisdom around what we can do as an alternative.
Interesting that you say that too, Mo, because one of my business partners is a master at what you just described.
Mhm.
He faces the reality of there is this thing happening next week and you're the integral part, but I understand where you're at and we'll work to make it work without you if we have to, but I have to ask you.
Yeah.
And
That,
that I think when a person receives that kind of sentiment, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, there's a feeling of I'm seen. They know me. And it doesn't fix a problem. It doesn't solve anything, but it does give a lift. And Mo, I've been using this one a lot lately. People will remember how you made them feel. Thank you, Maya Angelou. They will remember how you made them feel.
Absolutely. And even in the darkest of times, most of us are capable of also understanding what's real. So
Yes.
I'm in a
Yes.
job and I know that I've got a huge project deliverable next week and that my personal situation may interfere with that. I know that. I know that already, and I'm anxious about it probably because
Yeah.
I'm trying to say to you, my leader, I don't know how to handle this. I don't think I can show up gracefully at that thing with this crisis, but I know it's important. So what can we do?
Yeah.
And that's
So
that's what's real.
I I gotta ask you because even when I first met you, and when we had a conversation like we do with many before they come on the show to talk a little bit about get to know each other, if you will. Um, you had a level of optimism that I'll confess some years ago I probably lost some of my faith in the corporate machine and I do not throw stones because I live in a glass house. So, for those out there in our audience who are part of the corporate machine, I'm not throwing stones here. But it's interesting to me because I kind of look at it and go, well, Mo, how you described it at the beginning about the corporate drive for profit and at the expense of, and we're on this somewhat antiquated platform from the Industrial Revolution. How in the world can we get the two to be able to live together, right? Because you're right. I mean, if you're in a for profit business, it's for profit. And at the same time, now I do believe in my heart that it can be done. And I know of examples of where it is being done. I think it's maybe happening more in the private versus the sort of the shareholder public company situation. But are there a few things that maybe you'd bring up that give you optimism about how it can be done?
Well, here's what I would say. Thank you for noticing my optimism. I try, and also I too find things fairly dark
Hmm.
sometimes.
Right.
And we've seen a migration, in some of our work. And so I'm always, this comes up for me or like as a personal tension, because whenever if I'm ever introduced as a speaker or someone needs my bio, you see like some big name companies, they're publicly held companies. I've worked
Right.
with Amazon, I've worked with Google, I've worked with Nike, right? And I'm proud of that. I did good work with them. But
Hmm.
also, I'm not in my advising long-term strategic relationships with those clients because the reality is the leadership challenges that publicly held companies face make it almost impossible to do the right thing consistently because it's not
Hmm.
a natural system. No system thrives or makes money month over month in a constant upward direction to the right. That's not how
Right.
the natural system works.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that makes it really hard for the human beings that are leading in those systems to actually activate values-based, people-oriented decisions in a consistent way, even though they may want to. So I
Mhm.
that's a tough reality of I think um our publicly held commerce structure. Now,
Right.
can that be changed? Yeah, I take a lot of heart in research and work done by people like Kate Rayworth and others who talk about circle economies, who talk about how actually the sustainability of the organizations themselves, even the big ones, the publicly held ones, are going to be threatened by not considering beyond profit, which is what it is for me. It's not instead of profit. It's like in addition
Yes.
to profit. My husband, I've been watching a PBS show about the Gilded Age.
Mm.
And I've been thinking about it a lot around those early capitalists, Carnegie and all
Yeah.
those Rockefeller, how much money they made, how much it caught them off guard. Like they didn't expect to make that kind of money. And then their natural response was to turn to philanthropy, which
Hmm.
is still actually very controlling. Like if I have all the money and then I decide who to eke it out to, I may be in fact generous, but you can probably rest assured that it's not actually tapping into my central wealth. So I think one of the questions that comes up for me as I'm watching the Gilded Age and as I see what's happening today is how much profit is enough?
Mm.
We have right now, I think, what was the recent news about three trillionaires that are actually going to be in our federal administration, which is, I find myself saying, is that enough? Should someone have that much, someone human? Is it right for a just society where we tend to some common good? Is it the right thing that one person can be that wealthy? And I'm not suggesting that we limit it, but I am suggesting there's some moral decisions that have to happen with with the 1% that own that amount of wealth around common good.
Do you believe, Mo, that maybe we missed an opportunity to include the moral? Um, I'm going to call it the moral Rubicon, right? That, hey, you cross the river here, you need to understand something. Do you know what's over on the other side of this river? And I'm talking about the understanding of possessing power, possessing great wealth, what it really means. I come from a school of thought that believes that both of those have sway in the way that we operate as a human being. I don't know, and maybe you could tell me I'm wrong here. I don't know how much of that is actually being included at the business schools, the future CEOs, because it seems to me if the emphasis in a business school environment is quarterly earnings, shareholder value, expense control, well, when it comes time to look around at people, I would imagine it'd be very difficult to really do that with a sense of concern, sense of empathy, a sense of care. And someone would say, well, that's not their job. Well, okay, well, hold on. If you say it's not their job, are you telling me their only job is to generate massive amounts of profit? And then I think you got to think about, well, what's the outcome of that, right? So I'm being long on that, but what are your thoughts on that? Maybe we are not teaching some of that moral substance that's needed to do the right thing.
I don't think we are. I agree 100%. I don't think we are. And although I think we are trying in the younger grades, but I think you're right. When we get up to business school, medical school,
Mhm.
engineering school, there's lots of advanced schools that I think do focus myopically on one dimension of that practice without actually considering the full spectrum. You and I were talking before we started about, for example, medicine, where
Mhm.
a doctor can solve a medical problem and still miss dealing with the human being who's suffering. And so, is that the extent of their practice? Is that all they're supposed to do is to sew the sutures? You know,
Mhm.
and I don't think so. I don't think so. And I also feel that we lack courage in as a society, particularly here in the global West, around really knowing how to talk about this, how to name it without shame, how to open up the possibility that says, with great privilege comes great responsibility. And how are we going to use that responsibility with grace? And, the other piece I would say, Eric, it's so interesting to me because the vast majority of employees, and in fact, the vast majority of businesses here in the US are small businesses. They are
Right.
not the
Right.
mega.
Yeah.
92% of employees in America do not work for Amazon, Meta,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
Facebook. No, th
Right.
they don't. They work
Yeah.
for the small manufacturing company that's producing drywall corners down the street from me. They work for a local retail outlet. And so I think it can be hard to remember that as we try to do the right thing in the sphere of influence that we have, which is hard for me too, because going back to optimism, I can easily get overwhelmed at the futility of it all if I only look at what's happening in the tech sector, the mega companies, or even the federal government. And lately, especially this week, I'm really focused on what is my lane? Where can I
Mm.
go? Where can I have influence for the average leaders of systems that are working day in, day out that are not in those huge publicly held companies? So,
Yeah. Boy, that's really good, Mo. And that's a great encouragement to me because I as well, not in the same track, but remembering that the clients that we have need us to be that light that attracted them in the first place.
yeah,
And that's not me turning a deaf ear or to turn my head away from the larger problem. It's okay. I can work on what I have influence over. I've been given a certain universe, a certain plot of land or whatever. I've got to make the most of that. So with what you're saying there, it encourages me because I'm trying to remember that, as I alluded to, I need to be the light that attracted them in the first place, and it isn't about me turning a deaf ear to things that are on the larger scale, but I can make the best and probably only difference in where I am and what I have. And there's another thing that makes me think too, Mo, because I think about those employees who maybe are in that larger matrix type of organization. who say, yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. It's frustrating and I'm trying, but they don't seem to whatever. And I've kind of been messaging around, maybe it's that call to evaluate your life and what you want it to look like in a holistic way, right? Because I'm not one to predict that JP Morgan Chase is going to radically change the way in which they operate as an organization. My gut says they probably will not, based on the fact that Wall Street has a certain set of expectations that they, with empathy, I know they have to fulfill that. It would be monumental, and it probably would be more disruptive than anything we've ever seen for them to go in a different direction about that. So, if they are probably going to remain in that type of structure, then what are our choices? Does it have something to do with how we manage our mental health? Does it have something to do with evaluating whether or not going back to school would be an advantage, or fill in the blank with all kinds of different options? Because I do believe we have options. Jeff, what is the SEQ Development Report?
I'm glad you asked me that, Eric. The SEQ Development Report is something that we here at Spirit of EQ have developed to blend the idea of emotional intelligence with a person's spiritual life. And we're not talking about religion, we're talking about how they connect with themselves, other people, and the world around them.
Why is it important?
I think it's important because it allows someone to see where they stand, to give them information about maybe parts of their life they may need to work on, parts of their life that they're really doing well, and learn to leverage it. And it just gives a person a better way of getting through the world.
So how do you get this report?
Well, first, you need to contact us.
Mm-hmm.
Info at Spirit of EQ is just a great way to do it. Then you would take an assessment, 15, 20 minutes, done online. And then after that, the report requires a debrief to go through all the things in it because it's got a ton of information. And then if you want to further your journey, we can do coaching and things like that with you down the road. And that's basically it.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. And we'll be back to the episode after this. And now back to the episode. Can you speak a little bit to that part about the employee and the humanity of choices, maybe, if I can say it that way?
No, I love that. I was just talking about this with somebody yesterday as well, the power of choice in terms of the work that we do, where we do it, who we do it with.
Yep.
In my first book, Eric, which the title of which is Fit Matters, How to Love Your Job, which came out in 2017, I wrote that book with my co-author, Cami Dunaway. Cami just retired from the CMO role at Duolingo. And when I met her, she was working at Nintendo of North America. And I was coaching the president and executive team at that time in a privately held company. And Cami had come from Yahoo, and she had felt like it was the job of her dreams to work at Nintendo, but she only lasted 2 years. And when she left, I was coaching her as well as a member of the team. We talked a lot about it. And one of the things that she was really, she was sort of teasing me at that time about was, Mo, we should write a book about this, about how you can have more wisdom when you're looking for your next best job. And then roll forward, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, she left the company who was working for it at that time, and we had some bandwidth to write the book. And what our research was all about is, what is it we need from work? And how can we assess and decide as an employee or an employee to be where it is we want to hang our star? And I think that choice, being really discerning about that and being conscious that even as discerning as we are, we will probably be required to make trade-offs.
Right.
If we can see those trade-offs as temporary and for good reason, it can really help us validate the choice and also know that this may not be my forever place. And I've seen that happen over and over again. I've had a lot of companies who are, let's say, small to mid-sized companies who have employees, especially in the tech sector, who get recruited away and they go work for a big company. And then they come back knocking on the door, a couple of years later, like, hey, I needed that on my resume. But what I really want to make my life work is these things. And this company meets these needs because although our cash and non-cash compensation matter to our thriving, once two conditions are met, it falls way down in priority. Those two conditions are I feel paid fairly and I can meet my basic needs. So for actual human motivation, it's not true that money is our main motivator if those two conditions exist. So I'm now looking at, the conditions for my thriving also include, am I learning? Do I feel connected? Do I feel safe? Do I feel valued? Do I feel I have a purpose? What I do matters to someone. Those are the kinds of things that really last over the course of our career. So I think, I look back at my career and I think of some jobs that I've had where they weren't maybe the best jobs for me in the long term, but they were important jobs in the journey to where I've landed today. And it was good that I was there, and it was good that I didn't stay there.
Yeah.
Forever,
Boy, that's such a profound reality, right? I use this sort of as a my I was on a hike at Mount Rainier, and this was in the summer of last year, and and Mo, and as well as for our audience, I think the audience probably knows if they've listened to other podcast episodes. I am not some hiker. I mean, I'm an urban kid. And when my daughter said Mount Rainier, I'm thinking, we'll just climb up some steps and then we'll look out into the horizon and see Mount Rainier. But it was a serious hike. It was like a 6 mile deal. It was like, start at 6,000 evolution, 6,000 elevation and move up to 8,000, right? Oh my gosh. But it taught me a lot though, from a life perspective, because there were periods in that hike, Mo, where I thought, if I move 1 inch to the left, I'm going to go over the cliff and I'm going to die. There were
Yeah.
times, there were times where I thought, "Oh, this is not that bad. This is not that big of a deal." And then I look over into the horizon and see, well, guess what? You see how far that is? That's where
Right.
you're going. But Mo, what it helped me to understand is that our life, for example, is a larger story. These moments where we think 1 inch to the left, we're over the cliff, are just a part. And I think as I remember that as I go through this dynamic of career, right? And although I'm an entrepreneur like you, it's still a career. I've kind of it helps me when I hit those spots where I go 1 inch to the left and it's over. I can go, well, there really isn't an over until it's finished.
Yeah.
And you're not planning on finishing tomorrow. So, more than likely, this is just another part. Maybe there's some value in it. So, I think about that with employees is that not that they have to think or use my example as theirs, but well, maybe you should go and work for a large company to figure out, to focus in, to discover. And you know what? Maybe it is only going to last 2 years and you're going to go back to more of a medium. Just remember, you're building a story here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a whole journey. It's so funny. Your story is so funny. I totally get it. And here's a build on it. When I early in my career, I started my career, I think you know this, but I started my career as a wilderness guide. So
Boy, I'm forgetting. I didn't remember that.
so I'm a mountaineer, I'm a paddler, I'm a
Oh my gosh.
sailor. I've done a lot. I've had the privilege of doing a lot of adventure in my life. And I worked for two organizations many people have heard of, Outward Bound and the National
Okay.
Outdoor School
Mhm.
Knowles. And I also worked for a company called Project Adventure that was doing more corporate work, that was ropes course based. It was really good work. I loved it for a long time. And then I went to grad school. And then I graduated from grad school. And I had also been working back then, I was working as also a chemical dependency counselor because I was part of some of the early innovative programs that were bringing young people into wilderness as a therapeutic intervention. So I was both a
Mhm.
guide in that way. And then after grad school, I decided to jump ship and I got a job, my first job at a major corporation. It was in the cellular industry back when cellular phones were analog.
Yeah.
I'm dating myself there, right? But I'll
Right.
never forget the first few weeks at that job. I would come home and I'd say to my husband, these people, like I had so much judgment about these people. I was like, they're all capitalists. They don't, they don't care about the rest of the world. And also they wear these outfits that are ridiculous. Like I had to trade in my polypropylene and down jacket.
Right.
It was in the 80s, so like shoulder pads and nylon stockings. And I just was really full of a lot of judgment. I was worried that I had made a mistake. I was like, these aren't my people. And you know what happened? Over the course of that job, I think I was there 5 years, I learned that actually these people, many of these people were of very similar values to me. They wanted to be in the world, making a difference. They had different stories, very different than mine and different than each other. And so I began to see them in their humanity and that work itself in a way that profoundly shifted some of my judgments. So, for example, coming from the nonprofit sector, then being in the for profit sector, I began to see, oh, wait a second, some of these people are using the wealth they're building in some ways that are manifesting change in the world that I could never imagine on my nonprofit salary for the past 5 years. Isn't that cool? And it really opened up my eyes around a world that I had previously judged and found wanting, which was in that case a publicly held company. They were bought by AT&T. And I think that that kind of experience is important for us all to go through. Now, I ultimately left that company and I went to work for another consulting company, and then like you, started my own thing. But each of those stages taught me something new. And it's one of the things I'm really proud of younger generations today, the millennials, the Generation Zs that are coming up.
Hmm.
They're not expecting to stay at one job in one company or one sector for the course of their careers. In fact, the data tells us many of them might have as many as 12 or 15 career changes in their lives, not just job changes. So they have a much more temporally sensitive, I think, point of view around I'm doing this for now. And they're also very discerning around wanting to find a place to work that meets some of those basic needs rather than just where I think I entered the workforce with was trading time for money.
Yeah. So do you think that to a degree, speaking to the Gen Zs and the millennials, is it they're integrating their life into the work that they do? As in the decision making grid, meaning it's got to fit their life along with the
Live, they're
technical skills and all of that.
absolutely, and they're devaluing. And some of this is, I think, sad because it is related to increased cost of living and things. But I think sometimes I see young people making decisions that are very different than mine. Like an example is, I knew at a young age that like there were these priorities: own a car, own a house,
Hmm.
et
Right.
cetera. In young people today, I'm not necessarily seeing those as big motivators. I might see them saying, "Oh, I'd love to do this job for a while, but then I would actually like to relocate with my family for 2 years to really immerse in another language, and then we'll come back and we'll rent." You know, again, they're just focused on different priorities around experience, around quality of life,
Yeah.
around time with beloveds, around contribution or personal passions in addition to their job. But the job isn't a capital J the most important part of their identity. And I think that's kind of refreshing. Um,
Yeah, and I would also say, Mo, to the employer who I know might be out there in the audience and is going cringing. No, I can't have that turnover. Well, we can't lose people. I'm almost of the mind. Well, maybe you should adjust your perspective on turnover, right? Maybe you should see what it could be like if maybe a number of your employees are only going to be there for 2 years. And who knows, maybe you could structure something where you welcome them to go and live in a different place for a period of time and just give them a reason to want to come back to your company
Right.
because of, right?
Yes. Yes. And supporting that life, emancipating them to do their next best thing. And also, I think one of the things that's helpful for employers to remember is that it is, I think, on us as employers to make sure that our employees are being given a lot of support to understand why the work we're asking them to do matters.
Yep.
Because that's a lot of where meaning comes from. And I think
Mhm.
oftentimes employers fail to connect those dots. They assume the employee is going to understand. Oh, well, you doing balancing that spreadsheet, it helps us to make sure that we can still build resorts for people to have lovely, restful vacations. Okay, cool. But that bookkeeper who's slaving away 60 hours a week, who doesn't understand why that matters, is not likely going to choose to stay with you forever or even for very long. So
Yeah.
how do you make meaning out of your organization's purpose so that the employee actually feels like, oh, I'm responsible for taking care of this organization as it is also responsible for helping me have a good life.
Yeah. Yeah. How powerful. I know at some levels, there could be those that would think, well, that's easy for you and Mo to talk about on a podcast. But the reality is, well, it's like anything. You don't start to fix a problem until you start to fix a problem,
Yeah,
right? I
yeah,
mean, yeah, we could all say on the sidelines of what it should be and why it isn't and what it needs to be. Well, maybe this is your opportunity if you're out there to go, well, maybe we should start talking about this.
yeah.
And I still I'm not the biggest fan of hedge fund managers, Mo, but Bill Ackman has a quote that was pretty profound for me. Progress is like money, compounds over time.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And when I heard him when I watched the interview, this was at a time when he was reflecting on a time of crisis in his life. I mean, it was deep crisis. And I think for him, as I can say from my own experiences, when you're in crisis, when things are when it's a valley experience, man, do you ever value a little progress? And to wake up the next day and go, okay, well, you know what? I did 3 steps yesterday and today I've done 4. I'm
Yeah.
making progress, right? So I'm saying that in the sense of optimism and hope that it's not just Mo and Eric just having this frivolous conversation about, oh, it should be, it could be, and they should. No, it's if this is real. I mean, and again, in fairness to the publicly traded companies out there, I get it. There's a lot more nuance there. There's a lot more. It's a web. I get it, but I think if you are in a position of authority and leadership, control, ownership, whatever it may be, why not just start talking about it? Make that the first step of progress.
Absolutely. I love that. And you said something really important there, I think, Eric, which is like we really do have to talk about it. We have to be able to talk about it. And it's hard to talk about it
Yeah.
because it's complicated and we have a lot of assumptions about what good work looks like. And I'll tell you like a story from my own experience. When I was much younger, I worked for another consulting company and I was traveling 265 days a year. And I loved that job. It was really interesting work. I got to travel all over the world. I loved it. But I had 2 children under the age of 5. And
Mm.
the costs of my being gone that much on my family were starting to really stack up. And,
Yeah.
I didn't want to not do that job, but I also didn't feel that I could, like, personally keep holding it together. So I decided to talk to my boss. And my boss was very empathetic. She also was a young mother. She heard me, she felt me, and she said, I will support you dropping to part-time. That was my ask. Could I drop down to 3 days a week for a while and see, how that works? And she said, I can support that. I think we can make that work. But also, I want to be straight with you about what that means. And one of the things she said was, you probably aren't going to be getting the assignments in South Africa and Singapore, et cetera, because those are really hard to staff if you're only working 3 days a week. I don't know quite how we'd make that work. And of course, you'll have an income loss, but you know that, going in. And that first part of what she told me caught me off guard a little bit because what I heard it as was like, oh, your career is going to downshift. I was a senior consultant. I was like, I had a lot of power and status in that system. I owned a lot of clients in terms of our contracts. And when she said that, I was like, ooh, I'm not going to be client repping those. I'm not going to get to go to South Africa. Like, what about that? And I went home, talked to my husband. I was like, what do you think about this? And we agreed, actually. We were like, yep, it's going to be worth it. Because I got these 2 little boys at home that need
Mm.
to be home more than I am now. And it's going to be a loss, but it's going to be worth it. And the loss had to do with my identity, with some status and rank. And it was helpful. I appreciate my boss being straight with me about that reality because I did make that choice to go part-time. I think I did it for 2 years, maybe 3 before I ramped back up a bit.
Hmm.
Because she was also responsible for shepherding the success of the entity and also wanted me to know that she wanted to support me.
Yeah.
Beholden to both. And that takes courage, but it also was like, again, emotional intelligence skill. It was reality testing. She had optimism. She saw that it could be possible for me to do this in our system, but also wanted me to understand some consequences that might be naturally occurring. And I did. I didn't love it. I didn't love it. I watched my colleagues take over my clients as the lead, and I was like,
Oh, sure.
oh, this is kind of a drawing. But it was
Yeah.
a choice that mattered to me at that time. And I think that there's a lot of power in being brave enough to have those conversations, even when the outcome isn't quite as easy as we might have hoped that it would be.
Yeah. Wow. I want to pivot. How about what's exciting you right now in your world? What are you working on that you'd want our audience to know about?
Well, thank you for that question. I'm really a little bit obsessed right now with ungendering leadership.
Mm.
So you might have seen on my socials, I have a lot of concern about the state of men right now in our society. I've given a TED talk about it. I feel like, as a feminist, I feel concerned that the state of men, with a lot of metrics like increased suicide rates, increased addiction rates, perpetrators and victims of gun violence, men are actually really not doing that well as an identity,
Mhm.
and
Right.
and that's bad for all of us. That's bad for all of us. And one of the ways that plays out in the workplace, in my experience, is with very gendered notions of what good people leadership looks like. And at Momentum, we're really passionate about building leaders who are good for people. And what that takes is actually a behavior set that ought to be neither feminine or masculine, but it has historically been gendered that way. So to be more specific,
Mhm.
everybody out there right now is saying how critical, as an example, empathy and emotional and social intelligence are to effective leadership. But when we look at what men and little boys are taught, as Jennifer Bosom says, who's a University of Florida researcher about gender identity, men are given a very narrow band of emotional expression.
Mm.
So this is a problem. When we have the majority of C-suite positions filled by men who have been taught since they were little boys that they can only express really one or two emotions, anger being primary amongst them, because they're not going to be successful in being the leaders we need them to be. The same thing happens to women who try to show up in the way that society says good leadership looks like, for example, being assertive or even aggressive, and they're told that they're too harsh or that they're the B word. So I'm really interested right now in redefining, like, good leadership looks like this in men and women and non-binary gender identities, no matter what. This
Mhm.
is what good people leadership is. That's what's really activating me right now. How do we define that? How do we bust through some outdated mindsets and stereotypes that limit us and hurt us?
And Mo, that's really great. And I have seen some of your work in that regard, and I'm going, that's really cool because what you just mentioned about that narrow band, it makes me realize that as a society, um, and maybe it's because of the way our brain works, it hasn't evolved over time. It's very narrow in the sense of, protection, safety, right? And all of that, that um, the emotional literacy of men, do they understand that besides happy, mad, and sad, that there's a whole other host of emotions that you're going to feel, and you should be able to define those, not because you're being tested, but you should be able to define them so that when you feel them, you can put some language to it. You can say, "Oh, I'm familiar with this, and my proper move from here should be this because of what this emotion communicates to me." And I know that's not an overnight thing, but I applaud you for getting the conversation going, getting it out there, because I agree. I think your points are on mark. Yeah, in a big way.
It matters for all of us. And of course, it matters at home too. One of the things I'm often saying these days is that, until we really see men as competent carers at home, we won't achieve true equity. And this is part of what I'm seeing happen right now in our society that's pretty toxic, which is that we're doing a lot of, we're regressing back. For example, Mark Zuckerberg's recent comment about companies need to get more manly again, more masculine, right? We're hearkening back to like a fond memory of characteristics that actually aren't relevant in the modern landscape of what we actually know healthy workplaces demand, which is leaders who are capable of connection, of building community. They also need to be decisive and able to tolerate competition. And no, those other skills don't go away, but we've got to balance them with heart habit skills and community building skills that activate the human potential in their systems. And I think we have historically undervalued that. And it sets us up for a lot of problems. So yeah, I don't know quite where that's headed, but I know that I want to be part of it.
Well, here's to you.
Thank
Mo,
you.
I can't thank you enough for coming on. Hope you'll come back, because, once you're in, you're in.
I would be honored to come back. I love the work you're doing in the world. It matters so, so much, Eric, and I'm just honored to be here. And we could talk for days. So
Oh,
do it again.
yeah, because Mo, as I'm thinking as we're starting, I'm going, oh my gosh, so yes, you are welcome back, and we will have you back, because there's more I want to talk to you about.
Yep, me too. I look forward to it.
All right. And for our audience, we appreciate you tuning in as always, and we look forward to the next time we're together. Take care. Hi, everyone. This is Eric again. A couple of things as we've ended the show. We hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully, you're tuning in on a regular basis. We'd love it if you would give us a great review on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast. It's so appreciative and helps us as we try to get more exposure for the work we do and the episodes that we publish. And we're grateful to you as a listener. The second thing is, just remember, our content is for educational purposes only. It's not intended by any stretch to diagnose or to treat anything that may be occurring in your life or anyone else's life that you may be connected to through the podcast. But once again, we appreciate you tuning in to the shows. And as always, we look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care.